Hello, everybody, and welcome to SQL on the Edge. This is episode 17, and we're going to talk about Azure SQL Managed Instance. My name is Warner Chavez. I'm a SQL Server, MCM, and Microsoft Data Platform MVP, and I work at Pythian. Make sure you visit us at pythian.com. So the topic for today is Azure SQL Managed Instance. This is the latest offering in the Azure SQL Database space in Microsoft Azure. So it is slightly different than Azure SQL Database because it is a full instance as a platform as a service offering. This means that databases that are grouped inside the instance, they behave kind of like SQL Server on premises where they share their resources, they can communicate between each other, and it also enables some of the other features that are not on Azure SQL Database, such as SQLCLR or SQL Agent, for example. The goal of this service is to provide less migration friction where you're bringing a workload that's a SQL Server on premises to the cloud, because it's a lot more similar than, let's say, moving your SQL Server on premises to a bunch of individual Azure SQL databases or even to an Elastic database pool. Right? So the goal here, like I said, is to make it really easy for you to take your SQL Server workload on premises and move it to the cloud. Now, with the introduction of managed instance, Microsoft has also introduced a new pricing model. So for now, instead of just being DTUs, which was the unit of performance that we got used to in Azure SQL Database, the database transaction unit, managed instance is actually being sold in a virtual core model. So you choose the amount of virtual cores that you want. The amount of RAM that you get depends on how many cores you want. And then there's a couple of different tiers. There's general purpose and business critical as well. For the details on what the difference is between those tiers, please refer to the blog post that is part of this episode of SQL on the Edge. All right, so let's check out the demo. I'm going to show you guys the portal experience for creating a managed instance, and then we're going to connect to it with Management Studio and check out some of the configuration bits of managed instance. All right, let's go check it out. Okay, I'm connected here to the Azure portal, and I'm just going to go here and search for managed instance, and I'm going to get a couple of results. Click here on services SQL managed instances, and now I'm just going to click here where it says create SQL managed instance, and we're going to go through the creation blade here. So first I'm going to select a different description that I've already been using, and you are going to have to accept the preview terms so that you are allowed to create a preview managed instance. Remember, the service is not yet in general availability. Then just need to specify a name for your managed instance, and then you have to create the admin credentials for it. So I'm just gonna type a password here for my admin account. You have to repeat it here as well, and we should be good to go. Now, I already have an existing resource group that I've been using for my managed instance work, so I'm just going to reuse that. You're free to create a new one or use an existing one if you already have one. I'm going to leave it the location the same. And then virtual network, I already have some pre-created here as well. I know where I want it to go, so I'm just going to select here this managed instance default virtual network. Then the pricing tier, here's where you can pick whether you want it to be general purpose or business critical, whether you want it to be Gen 4 or Gen 5. Because it's only a demo instance for me, I'm just going to select here, I'm going to go Gen 4, and I'm going to go to the lowest price, which is 8 cores. This is a monthly price, but you're not charged for the entire month, right? You are charged by the hour. So I'm just going to select here. If you do have an existing agreement with Microsoft, you can save some money by saying that you're going to bring in your own license with software assurance. In this case, I don't, so I'm just going to leave it as no and press here on apply. And now it gives me a warning here that it might take a long time to create the first time that you create the instance. After that, it just takes a few minutes. And that's okay. I already created one, so it should only take a few minutes at least for me because I already did it once before. I just click on create, and we're going to go into validation and deployment. And in a few minutes, we should have our SQL managed instance up and running. Okay, so the deployment is over and I'm here on the SQL Managed Instances blade, and we can see here now I have my SQL Managed Instance called Warner Demo Instance. I can just click on it, and it'll take me to the blade with all the details. And here we can see at the top right corner where it says host, this is where I can get the host name that I can use to connect to it. Now keep in mind, managed instances are designed to live inside VNets. So you're going to have a host that actually is inside the same VNet or on another VNet, but has a way or a policy that allows it to reach it through the different subnets or through the different networks, right? There is no actual public endpoint right now here on this managed instance. So for example, I'm just going to click here to copy. And now I'm going to go back into Management Studio and show you guys how it looks from Management Studio. So the experience is very simple. And now I'm going to have to put in my password here. This is the same one that I used to create the managed instance. However, if you want, it also supports Azure Active Directory as well. Set it to remember. And I'm just going to click here, connect. And as we can see, it connects. And we have here the system databases. And unlike, for example, an Azure SQL Database server where you would only see master and the other ones are not accessible, on managed instance we can see the same 4 system databases that we are used to seeing on premises, right? So we have master, model, MSDB, TempDB. My guess is that eventually down the line they're going to enable replication scenarios, and then we might be able to see distribution database as well. But for now, this is what we get. Now I want to show you a couple of very interesting things about how managed instance works. So I'm going to open this script right here and just load it up. And here's the first thing. I just want to show you guys I'm connected to master on the managed instance and just select the version of it. We can see it says Microsoft SQL Azure 12, right? So this is Azure SQL Db, the 12th version of the platform. Keep in mind, it does not give you a SQL Server version number, right? It is no longer, the moment that you migrate your database into managed instance, it is no longer really just a one-to-one map to SQL Server, right? Becomes an Azure SQL DB instead, and it's just part of the cloud first, let's say, build of Azure SQL DB or SQL Server, right? So something very interesting here that I just want to show, if I go to the properties here for the instance, we're going to take a look at the core counts and the memory. So if I look here at the memory, for example, it has no cap. I can't change it. And here it says 172 gigs. And if I go to processors, and I open this up, you guys can see, I see here 8 CPUs, right, which is the amount that was set to my instance. However, if I look here on the screen, it says it's 24. So which one is it? Is it 24 or is it 8? If you guys remember on the portal, I did select 8. So why is it showing here 172? Why is it showing 24? But in fact, I have 8. And I don't really have 172 gigs of RAM. I have less than that. So the reason for that is that managed instance gets built on top of a VM that usually has beefier specs than the managed instance itself. And then the Microsoft team uses something called Windows jobs to sandbox those instances into smaller amounts of resources. In this case, it's 8 cores, and I think it's about 52 or something like that gigs of RAM. So we can actually look at that. So if I look here at the count of the schedulers, we can see I do have 8 schedulers like I was selected on the portal. Then we can select here as well for the RAM. We can see here I do have physical memory in this particular underlying VM, 176 gigs, but the committed target is 52 gigs. So it's actually only going to go all the way up to 52 gigs for the managed instance itself, right? So if I go here, I can select for the perf mount counters. This is another big difference compared to Azure SQL DB, which does not surface perf mount counters. Here I can confirm again, I get that 52 gig value. Now if there is this new DMV called sysdm job object, and I'm going to select from it. Oh, looks like I have the wrong name here. It's actually DMOS job object. So let's select that and run now. And we have it here. And then you can see here something very interesting. If we see the amount of the process memory limit in megabytes is 57 gigs here, right? So we're talking about the amount of memory that the SQL instance itself can use total. And then we can see that for the rest of this managed instance operation, what will be the underlying OS operations, it has about 6 gigs that it can use if it needed for some other memory that lives outside completely of the SQL Server address space, right? So something very interesting in terms of how managed instance is implemented. You don't really have to worry about it. All of that is set up and controlled for you. It's just something to understand when you're looking at some different parts of the configuration. Then you see 24 cores, you see more memory being reported by the high level instance properties, and those are not really the actual working values, right? But now you know how to get the real working values, so this does not confuse you. Other than that, very interesting new offering that, like I said, I would predict is going to reduce the friction for people to migrate into Azure, and it gives them a very familiar SQL Server experience. Okay, so I hope you got a good overview of the experience of SQL Managed Instance. As we saw on the portal, it's very easy to create it. A word of warning, the first time that you create it, it will take several hours. It took about 5 hours for me, but after that first time, it will only take a few minutes. We saw the experience of Management Studio, very familiar, so this is a service that will be really easy for current SQL Server DBAs to pick it up. We did see some differences in internals from SQL Server, for example, in how Microsoft is managing the sandboxing of resources for managed instances as well. This is important to understand so you don't get confused by what you see being reported by Management Studio and what is actually happening under the covers. And then the last thing to keep in mind, this is not just a VM that they throw some automation on top of it. Once you move into managed instance, you are using the Azure SQL Database Fabric, so you can take advantage of some of the advanced cloud features like Azure Threat Detection, for example. And when they enable new features that go into Azure SQL Db first, you will have access to them under managed instance. So it is not just a SQL Server in the cloud with some automation thrown on top of it. It is truly a PaaS service where you're going to take advantage of the cloud first model. Okay, so I hope you got a good idea now of Azure SQL Managed Instance, and stay tuned until next time.